Pokemon Y was not a great game. Hello, my name is Type the Writer and welcome back to my channel. In today's video I'm going to be talking about my opinions on Pokemon X and Y, mainly Y because that's the only one I've played, so strap in and get ready to angrily keyboard smash in the comments because I did not like this game. There will be spoilers in this video, so if you don't want to know then click away now. Before I get into this video, I feel some background is necessary. I bought my original 3DS back in the spring of 2016 along with a couple of DS games that were cheap to buy at the time. I didn't have any 3DS games at first until the summer of that same year when I was given Pokemon Y. It was the first ever 3DS game I played and until very recently, one of only 2 games in my 3DS collection. I never really used my 3DS. I didn't like the graphics of the DS games on the 3DS, and the only other game I had was Mario Kart 7, which, while it's an awesome game and I absolutely love it, is not the kind of game you can spend hours and hours of time binge playing, if only because it's not the most gentle on your thumbs. This left Pokemon Y as my main game on the 3DS, and unfortunately that was almost detrimental to my enjoyment of the game. I tried so hard to like the game. I am not kidding. It was the only story-based game I owned on the 3DS, and it was gifted to me, so I felt like I had to like it. But in all honesty, I didn't. I mean, don't get me wrong, at first the novelty of the game and oh my god, the 3D feature is really cool, kept me going, but eventually that began to wear off and I developed a deep-rooted sense of dread and dislike every time I looked at the case. I never wanted to pick it up and play it. I lost all my motivation for it. So I put it down. I just couldn't keep up with it. The game itself was super easy in terms of the puzzle solving, so it wasn't frustration from being unable to do it, but I just hated it. I couldn't explain why. I loved the Pokemon, the characters were pretty fun, the gyms gave me such a strong sense of satisfaction when I successfully beat them, but I still didn't like it. It took me years, and I mean years, to me. 3 years to beat this game, for God's sake, to explain my issues with the game in a way that felt right. But now I think I've mostly pinned it down to 3 main categories. The story, the battles, the map. Now I know what you're thinking, but that's the entire game. And you'd be sort of right, but before you click off this video thinking I'm going to be a hater slandering the entirety of Pokemon Y and the Pokemon series in general, stick with me for a bit. I am aware that Pokemon is targeted towards kids. I am also aware that a large number of its following are not kids. But despite this, the games still feel relatively childlike. From the simplicity of the game's structure, it being a linear and easily followed story with minimal, if any, side objectives, to the cutesy designs to the blatantly obvious hand-holding, Pokemon is a franchise aimed at kids. Which isn't to say the older fans can't enjoy it. If you do, go for it. But I mention this to preface my main point. The story felt forced. There was no real exploration aspect. If you didn't go where the story wanted you to, which was in a straight line most of the time, the game world, if it even existed, felt flat and lifeless. The character interactions were dictated by the story, so they also ended up feeling forced. Not to mention, Team Flare were just irritating. They were almost offensively easy to beat, but there were so many of them and you had to fight one to get past them to get to the next part of the game where you'll fight 5 more of them. And that's not even mentioning the worst offender, Lysander himself. He was an obvious plot twist villain and many saw it coming from a mile away, and yet that was not my biggest problem. My biggest problem was with his motivations. I've heard people argue it both ways, that his reluctance towards the role was the make or the break of his villain arc, but as a writer myself, I would have to say I sit firmly on the break side of the argument. It was a nice idea, in theory, but having just played through a game that broke every show don't tell rule going, having a villain who arguably had a more subtle and nuanced character motivation rubbed me the wrong way. Maybe it's nitpicky of me, but it felt tonally inconsistent and didn't fit with his actions or the plot of the game up until that point. To be honest, the entire story for this game felt like it was a last thought. For most of your time in this game, the story doesn't really exist until you get to a new location and suddenly you're bombarded with loads of information that could have easily been revealed to the player through the map rather than character dialogue or text boxes or signs for some reason. That was weird. Hoo boy. Now this section, this is the bit I would say is probably my biggest problem with the game, which is problematic because it's also the main part of the game. Battles took so long. From the cutscene introducing them to the move animations to the time it took just to press a button, especially if that button was run away. Everything took forever. Eventually, I turned the battle animations off because I got so sick of how long battles were. But that didn't turn off the intro cutscenes or the Mega Evolution animations. Random encounters were so annoying, but at least you could run from them. Trainer battles were infuriatingly tedious, especially later on in the game when you have a powerful team and you know you can one-hit kill the trainer's Pokemon, but for some reason the trainers always popped out right when I was in the middle of doing something, and it was so annoying to have to fight them off before I could just move the 5 steps I needed to get to the next part of the game. It annoyed me how you constantly ended up back in Lumia City. It was okay, I guess, but there wasn't really a whole lot there, especially when you consider it was meant to be the central hub of the game. Like, yeah, sure, there's some character customization, but other than that, there wasn't much to see. After your initial visit, where seeing those 2 Pokemon walking around the city was kinda cool, and oh my god, it's Paris! It got boring pretty quickly. Lumia City was supposed to be a bustling city brimming with life, but to me it felt like a bigger town, but way more difficult to navigate. And the camera did not help that. Oh god, was the camera the worst. Even with the second C-stick on the new 3DS, you cannot control the camera, and it was infuriating, to say the least. Sometimes you'd walk through a door multiple times before actually being able to move where you wanted because the camera perspective would change, so pressing forwards on the circle pad would end up sending you straight back out through the door. I can forgive the map design itself because it's an older game for a handheld console, so obviously it has to take some liberties, but the camera? That sucked. Especially considering the fact that there are games on the 3DS that have a camera that you can control. Look at Majora's Mask. In conclusion, Pokemon Y isn't the worst game in the world. It definitely isn't the best game either though. Honestly, for the highest grossing franchise of all time, Pokemon is frighteningly average. At least in my opinion. I've heard hardcore fans who followed the series all the way up to the present talk about how they've started to grow out of Pokemon. There's a great video that will leave in the description for you that covers this topic actually. But I was never into Pokemon. I never watched the anime. I never played a single game or spin-off title until 2016. Pokemon Go was my first real introduction to the franchise, and Pokemon Y was the first ever main series title I played, and yet I already felt like I'd grown out of it. Every video I watched on the topic would either wax poetical about the game or criticize its mechanics using points I had no hope of understanding with my complete ignorance of the way stats work in the game. So that's why this video exists. This video is an opinion on Pokemon Y from the perspective of someone who has never played Pokemon and was disappointed to find it didn't live up to the hype very well. That being said, I recently bought myself a new 3DS and it came with Pokemon Moon, so obviously I had to try it out. After my less than amicable experience with Y, I went into Moon expecting the worst, especially since I'd already read some reviews of the game and was scared it would be even worse than Y. But already, it feels so much more polished than Y. You can tell this is a game that's at the end of its console's life cycle because it really feels like they've learnt from their previous mistakes and now know the limits of the device, so they can improve their game because of it. I'm not going to go into detail about why I like Moon, as that sounds like a whole separate video once I finish the game. I'm only about 5 hours into it, so my opinion could definitely change. As for Pokemon Y, I gave that game to my sister along with my old 3DS console, and so far she seems to be absolutely loving it. Watching her coo over Fennekin or cheer as she beats another trainer with ease has made me slightly less mad about the game. After all, she's enjoying it. Maybe I just wasn't the right audience. A year on from beating the game, and I can now safely say I don't regret playing Pokemon Y. It helped me realise what I wanted in a game and what I really didn't like, so in a way it gave me insight into my own interests, which is always good. Plus, I'm not ashamed to admit that it felt amazing to watch my team, the Pokemon I'd named and come to love as if they were real, flash up on the screen as I beat the champion. After 3 long years of struggling not to hate this game, it was the end that really made me appreciate all the work I'd put into it. And I will never forget Key, my first ever Pokemon and my favourite Pokemon to this day. Love you, Key. And with that, I finish this video with a question for you guys. In your opinion, what is the worst Pokemon game and what is the best? And why? I hope you enjoyed this video. It's been a long time coming, as anyone who knows me will probably tell you as I go on another hour-long rant about it, but I've never quite been in the right headspace to do it, so I'm glad I can finally get this video out into the world. Thank you so much for watching. If you like this video, please make sure to give it a thumbs up so I know. If you like this kind of stuff and you want to see more of me, or well, I guess hear more of me, then consider hitting that subscribe button. And if you want to be aggressively reminded of every time that I post, every once in a blue moon, then hit that notification bell as well. Notification squad, where you at? I hated that, I'm never saying that again. Thank you again for watching, and I will see you in my next video. Goodbye! Yeah, I started waving again. I was just flapping my arms around all over the place. Cannot actually not flap my arms. It is ridiculous.